My name is Brenda, I'm 58 years old, and I took the $80,000 I'd saved for my daughter's wedding and bought myself a house on a lake. Before I tell you how my signature on a deed led to the absolute implosion of her dream wedding, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's always nice to know who I'm talking to. The keys to my new life felt heavy and real in the palm of my hand. I was standing on the cedar deck of a small cottage, a place I'd only dreamed of, looking out at the calm, sparkling waters of Lake Michigan. It was a perfect afternoon in Door County. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the shore. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace settle deep in my bones. It was a quiet, profound stillness. And then my phone rang. The harsh, digital noise sliced through the tranquility. I pulled it from my purse, my heart giving a familiar, nervous flutter when I saw the name on the screen. Jessica. My daughter. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost chose to preserve my perfect moment of peace. But I knew I couldn't. This call was always coming. This was the other shoe waiting to drop. I slid my finger across the screen to answer. I didn't even have a chance to say hello. Mom, what is going on? Her voice wasn't a voice. It was a shriek high-pitched and jagged with pure unfiltered panic. It was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear for a second. Jessica, calm down, what's wrong? I asked, my own voice sounding unervingly serene against her hysteria. Don't tell me to calm down, she screamed back, her words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. Patricia from the Sterling Grand just called me. She called me, Mom. She said the final deposit was never sent. The $80,000 deposit. She said they're going to release our date to another couple if they don't get a wire transfer in the next hour. I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the clean lakeside air. $80,000. It sounded like such an obscene amount of money out here. Mom, are you listening to me? She screeched. Did you forget to mail the check? Is this some kind of sick joke? My wedding is in 3 months. Everything is booked. The flowers, the photographer, 200 guests have invitations. Everything depends on the venue. A sick joke. I turned that phrase over in my mind. Oh, the irony was rich. The joke had been on me for years, a long, slow, painful prank that I was only just now understanding. But the punchline was finally mine to deliver. I took a slow breath, letting the fresh, pine-scented air fill my lungs. I looked out at the water, sparkling under the afternoon sun. My water. My view. My life. My hand holding the phone was rock steady. The woman who would have crumbled under the force of that panic a month ago was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone I was just getting to know. No, Jessica, I said, my voice steady, devoid of any of the warmth she was used to. There was a pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, the confusion warring with her impatience. No? No what? No, you didn't forget. That's right, I said. I didn't forget. Well? What happened then? She demanded, her voice rising again. Where is the money? I let a small tight smile touch my lips, a smile she couldn't see. I leaned against the railing of my new deck, the wood solid and reassuring against my back. I looked from the keys in my hand to the charming cedar-shingled roof of my very own cottage, then out to the endless, beautiful expanse of the lake. Oh, the money is perfectly safe, I said, my voice soft, almost a whisper. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. To understand why I didn't just write that check, why I didn't just smooth things over like I always had, you have to understand who we were. Before the Lockwoods. Before the money. Before my daughter became a stranger. For 26 years, Jessica and I were a team. It wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. Her father, my Michael, was ripped from our lives by a sudden massive heart attack when she was just 12. One day he was there, complaining about the lawn and kissing me goodnight, and the next there was just a gaping silent hole where he used to be. That kind of grief doesn't just visit, it moves in. It welds two people together. We were all each other had. We navigated the treacherous waters of her teenage years as a unit of two. I was the one who held her when she cried over her first breakup, the one who taught her how to drive, the one who sat through endless high school plays just to see her on stage for 5 minutes. I poured every ounce of myself into that girl. After Michael's funeral, when the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathetic phone calls dwindled, I made a hard choice. We sold the big house in Naperville, The one Michael and I had poured our hearts into. The one with the big oak tree in the backyard he'd sworn he'd build a tire swing on. I sold our memories to buy her a future. We moved into a small, cozy bungalow, and I took every penny of the inheritance Michael had left, every cent from the sale of our home, and I invested it. Not in stocks, not in bonds, but in flour and sugar and butter. I started Brenda's Bites. It began in my tiny kitchen, just me and a secondhand mixer, baking cupcakes for school fundraisers and local birthdays. It was hard. There were mornings I'd get up at 3 a.m. to start baking, my body aching, my mind numb with exhaustion, and I'd see a picture of Michael on the fridge and just start crying into the dough. But then I'd think of Jessica, sleeping peacefully in her room, and I'd wipe my eyes and keep going. Slowly, painfully it grew. I leased a small storefront. I hired a part-time helper. Brenda's Bites became the place you went for your morning coffee, the place you ordered the cake for your kid's first birthday, the place that felt like home. Every dollar I made, every ounce of energy I had was for her. I wanted her to have the choices I never did. I was determined that she would graduate from a top-tier university without ever knowing the crushing weight of student loan debt. Her entire college fund was built on cinnamon rolls and chocolate chip cookies. And she did. She walked across that stage debt-free with a world of possibilities at her feet, a world I had built for her one cupcake at a time. Our relationship was our bedrock. It was built on late-night talks over mugs of tea, on 1,000 inside jokes nobody else would get, on the shared history of surviving the unthinkable together. I wasn't just her mother. I was her confidant, her biggest fan, her constant. I thought that was unbreakable. I thought nothing could ever come between us. Then she met Preston Lockwood. He was, on the surface, everything you'd think a mother would want. He was handsome in that clean-cut, catalog model kind of way, impeccably dressed, and came from a family that didn't just live in Lake Forest, they were Lake Forest. The Lockwoods were old money, the kind of quiet, multi-generational wealth that comes with its own set of unspoken rules and impenetrable snobbery. To them, my life, a life of hard work and self-sufficiency, was quaint but ultimately unserious. A hobby. And soon my daughter started to see it that way too. My first official introduction to the Lockwood clan was an invitation to Sunday brunch at their estate. The word house simply didn't do it justice. It was a sprawling stone mansion that looked more like a museum than a home, surrounded by acres of manicured lawns that seemed to roll on forever. I drove up the long winding driveway in my reliable but decidedly middle-class Honda, feeling like I was entering a different country, one where I didn't speak the language. The car felt shabby and loud compared to the silent, gleaming Mercedes and BMWs parked in the circular drive. I'd spent a week worrying about what to wear. I finally settled on a simple but elegant silk dress, a deep sapphire blue that I'd saved up for and always felt beautiful in. I brought one of my signature cheesecakes, the one with the raspberry swirl that people raved about. I thought it was a nice personal touch, a little piece of my world to share with them. Preston greeted me at the door, a polite but distant smile plastered on his face. He led me through a cavernous foyer with marble floors and a chandelier the size of my car, out to a stone patio overlooking gardens that looked like they were ripped from a magazine. And there she was, Eleanor Lockwood. She was tall and slender, dressed in cream-colored linen that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and she had a smile that didn't quite reach her cold, assessing eyes. Her gaze flickered over me from my shoes to my hair, and I felt like I was being appraised. "Ah, you must be Brenda," she said, her voice smooth as glass. She didn't offer to shake my hand. Her eyes landed on the cake carrier in my hands. "How lovely of you to bring a dessert." The way she said it, with a slight pause, made it sound like I brought a science project. Jessica, standing beside her, looked flushed and uncomfortable. She was wearing a delicate white dress that I'd never seen before, one I knew she couldn't have afforded on her salary. "Mom, this is Eleanor, Preston's mother." "It's a pleasure to meet you," I said, forcing a smile that felt tight on my face. "Your home is breathtaking." "Yes, it's been in the Lockwood family for 4 generations," Eleanor replied as if I'd asked. The conversation was stilted and awkward. She asked me about Brenda's Bites, referring to it as my charming little project. I tried to explain that it was a full-fledged business with 6 employees, but she just smiled that vacant smile and said, It's so important to have a hobby, isn't it? But the real moment, the one that I would later look back on as the beginning of the end, happened about an hour in. I was standing near a small table, making polite conversation with one of Preston's uncles about the weather. Eleanor approached, holding a glass of dark red wine. "Brenda, dear," she said, stepping a little too close, invading my personal space. "Preston tells me you've been a widow for quite some time. It must be so difficult running a business and everything, all on your own." The pity in her voice was a weapon. Before I could formulate a reply that was both polite and dignified, her hand gave a delicate little oops gesture. The entire glass of Cabernet tipped forward, cascading directly down the front of my sapphire blue dress. A collective gasp went through the small group around us. The wine soaked into the silk instantly, a deep, ugly stain spreading across my chest. Felt hot, then cold against my skin. It looked like I was bleeding. "Oh my goodness!" Eleanor exclaimed, her hand flying to her mouth in a perfect pantomime of shock. But I saw it. For a split second, I saw the flicker of a smirk on her lips. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of overly dramatic concern. "How clumsy of me. I am so terribly sorry." She grabbed a tiny cocktail napkin from the table and began dabbing at the stain, a useless performative gesture that of course did nothing but smear it further. "Oh dear," she said, looking at the ruined fabric with feigned pity. "With a material like that, I'm afraid a stain like this will be quite permanent. What a terrible shame." The insult was double-barreled. My dress was cheap and I was not one of them. I stood there humiliated, the wet fabric clinging to me, the smell of wine sharp in my nostrils. And I looked at my daughter. I looked at Jessica, my eyes pleading with her to say something, anything. To say, "Mom, are you okay?" Or, "It was an accident, Eleanor, let me help you." But she did nothing. She just stood there frozen, her face a blotchy red. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at a point over my shoulder, wishing, I'm sure, that the ground would swallow her, or me whole. In her silence she made her choice. She chose them. That was the first crack in the foundation of us. A deep, jagged fissure. I mumbled my excuses and left shortly after. I drove home with the windows down, the cold air doing little to cool the hot shame and anger burning in my chest. It wasn't about a ruined dress that cost a week's profit. It was about a daughter who stood by and watched her mother be humiliated, and did nothing. After the wine incident, things began to change, not with a bang, but with a slow, creeping chill. The daily phone calls from Jessica became every few days, then once a week. When we did talk, the easy warmth was gone, replaced by a strained politeness. It was like talking to a polite, distant acquaintance who happened to call me Mom. The slow poison of the Lockwoods' influence was seeping into her. I started to hear Eleanor's voice in my daughter's words. The cutting remarks were never direct. They were subtle, insidious, couched as helpful suggestions that made me feel like a project that needed fixing. "Mom, I was thinking," she said one day over the phone. "Maybe you should think about updating the decor in your living room. The Lockwoods are thinking of hosting a small get-together for the families, and it's just a little dated." My living room, filled with furniture Michael and I had picked out together, pieces that held the shape of our life, was now dated, and not fit for Lockwood eyes. Another time she visited the bakery. She used to love coming by, her face lighting up as she sampled a new cookie recipe. This time she stood by the door, her designer purse clutched in her hand, and wrinkled her nose slightly at the controlled chaos of the lunch rush. "It's getting really busy in here. Have you thought about hiring a proper manager? You look tired." What I heard was, "You're working too hard. This is not how people like us live. This is labor." The worst was when she started critiquing me directly. One Saturday she came over unexpectedly. "I need to borrow something to wear for a charity polo match," she announced, heading for my closet. As she rifled through my clothes, a stream of quiet judgments filled the air. "Oh, Mom, you still have this. This color really does nothing for you. No one really wears that brand of handbag anymore." She pulled out a classic black dress I loved. "This is so simple. Let me get you a new one for your birthday." It wasn't a generous offer. It was a judgment. It was a message that I, in my current form, was not good enough to be associated with her new glossy life. I was becoming an embarrassment, a slightly shabby middle-class obstacle to her ascent into the Lockwood world. I tried to talk to her about it once, my heart in my throat. We were having coffee, and the silence between us was heavy. Jess, honey, is everything okay? You seem distant. We don't talk like we used to. She became defensive instantly, her back stiffening. I'm fine, Mom. I'm just busy. Preston and I have a very active social life. And planning a wedding is a lot of work, you know? It was an excuse, a wall she threw up between us, painted with the Lockwoods' busy, important lives. The breaking point for me before the final catastrophic break came one Tuesday evening. She called me, and for a moment my heart leaped with a foolish hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe she was calling just to talk like we used to. Hey, Mom, she said, her voice bright and a little too casual, the way it got when she wanted something. Hi, sweetie. How are you? I'm great. So, I have a kind of crazy question for you. I waited, my stomach tightening. You know how you're helping out with the wedding and everything, which is so amazing of you. She began, the flattery a clear runway for what was coming next. Well, Preston and I were at the dealership today just for fun, you know, and we saw the most perfect BMW. It's the new X5 and it's us. Okay. I said, my voice barely a whisper. And we were thinking, I know this is a huge ask and please don't be mad, but since you're being so generous with the wedding, we were wondering if maybe we could get our wedding gift a little early. I was floored. I just stared at the wall, the phone feeling heavy and cold in my hand. She wasn't asking for a toaster or a set of towels. She was asking for a car that cost more than my first year's salary at the bakery. She was asking me to liquidate more of my hard-earned savings, more of Michael's legacy, for a status symbol. Jessica, I said, my voice quiet but firm. No, I can't do that. The money I have is for the wedding we agreed on, and for my own retirement. I'm not a bank. The cheerful facade dropped instantly. Her voice became clipped and cold. Fine, she said. I just thought I'd ask. Forget it. It's not a big deal. But it was, and we both knew it. It's not about, I started, but she cut me off. I have to go, Preston's waiting. We're going to dinner. I'll talk to you later. She hung up. And the silence that followed was the coldest one yet. It was the sound of a door slamming shut between us. I knew then, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that I wasn't just losing her to another family. I was losing her to a world of greed and entitlement that I didn't recognize, and that I had somehow paid for. A few weeks after the BMW incident, the official engagement was announced. Not with a personal call from my daughter, her voice trembling with excitement. Not with a surprise visit, ring extended. It was announced to the world and to me via a perfectly curated post on Instagram. A picture of a massive diamond ring on Jessica's finger, her hand resting artfully on Preston's arm. The caption read, "The first day of our forever. I can't wait to be Mrs. Lockwood." I saw it because my niece tagged me in the comments. I had to call her to offer my congratulations, my voice sounding cheerful and hollow in my own ears. The wedding planning began almost immediately, and it was clear from the start what my role was: the financier. Eleanor and Jessica would meet at country clubs for lunch to discuss visions, and then Jessica would call me with the price tags. The Lockwoods had plenty of opinions, but they certainly had no intention of opening their ancient, well-guarded checkbooks. They were experts at spending other people's money. The venue was the first major battleground. The Sterling Grand, Eleanor had declared, was the only acceptable option in the Chicago area. It was a breathtakingly expensive historical hotel downtown, famous for its grand ballroom and impeccable service. A wedding there was less a party and more a coronation. It was featured in magazines. It also cost more than I had paid for my entire bungalow. "Mom, it's perfect," Jessica pleaded over the phone, her voice laced with a desperation that twisted my heart. "It's what the Lockwoods expect. It's their circle. Anything less would be, well, it would be embarrassing. For me. For me. Not for us. For her. She needed to prove she belonged in their world, and my bank account was her entry ticket." She came over to my house, brochures in hand, her eyes shining with a feverish light. She talked about the crystal chandeliers and the gold leaf ceilings. I saw the desperate hope in her eyes, the need to secure her place in that family, and like a fool, I caved. My love for the daughter she used to be blinded me to the woman she was becoming. "Okay, honey," I said, my heart aching. I'll cover the venue and the catering. That will be my gift to you. It was a massive, financially strenuous gift. The total for just those two things was going to be over $150,000. It was a significant portion of what Michael had left in his life insurance, the inheritance I was supposed to use to take care of myself in my old age. It was the safety net he had left for me. But I signed the initial contract. I paid the preliminary deposit. The much larger, non-refundable final deposit of $80,000 was due in a few months. I threw myself into the planning, hoping that by participating, I could somehow reconnect with her. I spent hours negotiating with the venue coordinator, a brisk woman named Patricia. I compared floral arrangements, tasted cakes, and reviewed band demos. I tried to offer suggestions, ideas from our own family traditions, but they were always gently dismissed. That's a sweet idea, Mom, but Eleanor thinks. I kept a thick white binder labeled Jessica and Preston's Wedding. It was filled with contracts, swatches, and timelines. It became my part-time job, a job I was doing out of love, a job I was not only doing for free but paying for. I would sit at my desk late at night, after a long day at the bakery, and stare at the staggering figures, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Was I doing the right thing? Was this love? Or was this enabling a fantasy I could no longer afford emotionally or financially? I should have seen the signs. I should have known. The biggest deception wasn't about the cost of the flowers or the flavor of the cake. It was about belonging. I had put my entire heart and my life savings into this wedding, believing that it was the key to my daughter's happiness. But what I didn't know was that I was funding the biggest betrayal of my life. You have to keep listening to understand what they did behind my back because it's the key to everything that happened next, and it is so much worse than you can imagine. I only found out about the engagement party by accident. It was a quiet Saturday night. I was at home, curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea, tired after a long week at the bakery. I was scrolling through Facebook, catching up on friends' vacation photos and baby pictures, when a photo album popped up in my feed. It was posted by one of Preston's cousins, a woman named Isabel whom I'd briefly met at the disastrous brunch. The album was public, titled, Celebrating Jessica and Preston. My heart stopped. My thumb hovered over the screen. Celebrating? I clicked on it. There were hundreds of photos. Photo after photo of a lavish party set in the Lockwoods' perfectly manicured gardens. The kind of party you see in magazines. There was Jessica, radiant in a shimmering off-white designer dress I'd never seen, laughing as she held up her hand to show off the ring. There was Preston, looking smug in a tailored suit, a glass of champagne in his hand. There was Eleanor holding court like a queen, her arm draped possessively around my daughter's shoulders, a triumphant smile on her face. There were champagne towers and string quartets. There were caterers in crisp white uniforms serving tiny, elaborate appetizers. There were dozens of smiling, beautifully dressed people mingling under twinkling lights that had been strung through the ancient oak trees. The entire Lockwood clan was there. All of Preston's friends were there. I even recognized some of Jessica's friends from college, girls who had eaten dinner at my kitchen table countless times. Everyone was there. Except me. I scrolled through every single picture, my hand starting to shake so badly I could barely control the phone. My mind couldn't process it. It was like watching a movie of a life that was supposed to be mine, but with my character edited out. An engagement party. My own daughter's engagement party. A celebration of the union I was expected to finance. And I wasn't there. I wasn't just not invited. I was completely intentionally erased. It was as if I didn't exist. A cold, hollow feeling spread through my chest, so intense it felt like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. I thought about the white binder on my desk. I thought about the hours I'd spent on the phone with the venue, the deposit I had already paid, the $80,000 check sitting in my desk drawer. I was good enough to fund the main event, but not good enough to attend the celebration. My presence was an embarrassment, but my money was a necessity. The hurt was visceral. It was a raw, open wound. It was the public declaration of what I had been feeling for months. I was not welcome. I was the out-of-place, middle-class mother with a small-town bakery. I didn't fit into the glossy, perfect picture they were creating. They had airbrushed me out of the family portrait before it was even taken. I closed my laptop, The screen going dark on a photo of Eleanor raising a glass to toast the happy couple. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. The hurt was too deep, too cold. It was a chilling realization. I just sat there in the dark, the silence of my little house pressing in on me. The woman on the screen, laughing and toasting with the Lockwoods, was not my daughter. My daughter, the one I had raised, the one who held my hand at her father's funeral, would never do this to me. That woman was a stranger, a creation of the Lockwood world, and she had just committed the ultimate act of betrayal. I waited a full day. I needed the raw white-hot anger to cool into something I could control. I needed my voice to be steady when I made the call. The next evening I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the phone. My heart was pounding, but my resolve was like steel. I was going to get an answer. I kept my voice even, almost light, a feat of acting that deserved an award. "Hi, honey." "Oh, hey, Mom," she said, sounding distracted like I was interrupting something important. "It looks like the party was beautiful. I saw the pictures online," I said, each word feeling like a shard of glass in my mouth. There was a telling pause on the other end of the line. A guilty pause. "Oh," she said, her voice suddenly small. "Yeah, it was nice." I waited. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to sit in the discomfort of her own deception. It was the longest 10 seconds of my life. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning a hole in my soul. "I was just wondering," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "why I wasn't there." And what she said next, what she murmured in a voice laced with casual, devastating cruelty. It was the sound of a final door slamming shut forever. It was the moment that changed everything. She let out a little sigh. The sound a teenager makes when they're annoyed at being caught in a lie they didn't think they'd have to defend. It was the sound of impatience, of inconvenience, the sound of me being a problem she had to manage. And then she delivered the line that would echo in my mind for weeks, the line that severed the last thread of the bond one thought was unbreakable. "It was just his family, Mom," she murmured, the words a toxic cocktail of apology and dismissal. It was very formal. The Lockwoods' inner circle. "You know, you wouldn't fit in. You wouldn't fit in." The words hung in the air between us, cold and sharp and final. She hadn't just excluded me from a party. She had judged me, weighed me against her new shiny family, and found me wanting. She had declared me unfit. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A strange, cold calm washed over me. So profound it was almost an out-of-body experience. It was the kind of clarity that comes after a lightning strike. In that instant, everything became crystal clear. The subtle digs about my clothes, the condescending remarks about my home, the canceled plans, the humiliation over the spilled wine. It all clicked into place. It wasn't a series of thoughtless slights. It was a campaign. A quiet, systematic effort to push me to the margins of her life. I finally understood my role. I was the walking, talking bank account, the silent partner, the ATM. I was the embarrassing blue-collar foundation upon which she was building her glamorous new life. My money was welcome, but I was not. My salary was a stepping stone, but my presence was a social liability. I saw the rest of my life stretching out before me in that moment. A series of events I would be expected to pay for but be politely excluded from. Holidays where I'd be seated at the end of the table. Grandchildren's birthdays I'd only see in pictures, my face cropped out to preserve the aesthetic. All for the sake of appearances. I saw myself relegated to the role of the dowdy, out-of-place mother-in-law, a necessary evil, a checkbook to be called upon when needed. And I just thought, no, absolutely not. Michael didn't work his whole life for this. I didn't build a business from scratch with my own 2 hands for this. I would not allow myself to be treated like a dirty secret. I would not pay to be disrespected. "Okay, honey," I said, my voice eerily serene. "I understand." And I did. I understood perfectly. I hung up the phone. The next day my younger sister Sharon called. She lived a few states away, but the family gossip grapevine is long and efficient. "Brenda, I heard about the party," she said, her voice cautious. "Are you okay?" I told her what happened. I told her what Jessica said, repeating the words "you wouldn't fit in" like a confession. I expected outrage. I expected her to be on my side, to share my righteous anger. Instead she sighed. A long, weary sigh that was full of judgment. Oh, Bren. I know it hurts. But you know how these wealthy families can be. They're a different breed. Jessica is just trying to navigate a new world. She's probably under a lot of pressure from Eleanor. Pressure? Sharon, she told me I didn't belong. Don't you think you should be the bigger person here? Sharon pressed on, her voice taking on a preachy tone. It's her wedding. Her one big day. Just let it go. Pay for the venue and be happy for her. Don't ruin this for her over one stupid party. Don't let your pride get in the way of your daughter's happiness. It's just money after all. Felt like a second betrayal. Be the bigger person? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Being the bigger person is what got me here, Sharon. Always smiling, always understanding, always paying. And where did it get me? Uninvited and told I'm not good enough. I thought about the divorce she had gone through years ago, how I had supported her, how I never said a word against her ex, even when he was a jerk. The lack of loyalty felt like a slap. You're being dramatic, she said, her voice cool. Think about Jessica. Oh, I am thinking about Jessica. I said, my decision hardening into something unbreakable. I'm thinking about the lesson she needs to learn. My sister's words, meant to pacify me, had the opposite effect. They solidified my resolve. If I was on my own, then I would act on my own. For my own good. The switch inside me had flipped. The warm maternal instinct to give Jessica the world was replaced by a cool, rational sense of self-preservation. My grief over the loss of our closeness hardened into a quiet, unshakable resolve. After that phone call with my sister, I stopped fighting. I stopped trying. I accepted the terms Jessica had set. I was not family. Therefore, I had no familial obligations. The logic was as clean and cutting as her dismissal. My new mantra became, respect is not optional. It is the price of admission into my life and into my bank account. For the next few weeks, Jessica acted as if nothing had happened. It was a masterclass in denial. She was in her own little bubble of wedding planning, completely oblivious to the chasm she had opened between us. She'd text me pictures of flower arrangements and bridesmaid dresses with captions like, "What do you think of this one? Isn't it divine?" My responses were polite, monosyllabic, delivered after hours of delay. Nice. Lovely. Great choice. I imagine she interpreted my distance as me being in a temporary sulk, a petty snit I would eventually get over, especially with the big deposit deadline looming. She had grown up in a world where my support was unconditional, a fundamental law of her universe like gravity. The idea that my financial backing was directly linked to her respect was a connection her entitlement made her completely blind to. She saw my money as a separate entity from me, a resource she was owed. Meanwhile, I was making plans. Quiet, secret, life-altering plans. In my small home office, the white wedding binder sat on my desk like a tombstone, a monument to a relationship that was dead. For months, it had been my part-time job. I opened it and looked at the tab for venue. There was the contract for the Sterling Grand, with its staggering figures and its long list of clauses. And tucked into the front pocket was the cashier's check I had written out 3 days before the fateful phone call. It was for $80,000 made out to the venue. It was just sitting there waiting to be mailed. Staring at that check, I felt a profound sense of clarity. That piece of paper wasn't just money. It was my daughter's entry fee into the Lockwood clan. It was the price of her happiness, or what she believed was her happiness. It was also the price of my dignity, and I was no longer willing to pay it. The check represented my future, my security, the fruits of Michael's labor and my own. And I was about to just give it away to people who thought I wasn't good enough to share a meal with. With a steady hand, I took the check. I didn't tear it up. That felt too emotional. Instead, I slid it not into an envelope addressed to the Sterling Grand, but into a different folder at the back of my personal filing cabinet. The one labeled Future. That $80,000, which was no longer earmarked for canapes and floral arches, felt like a liberation fund. For years, my own dreams had been on the back burner. Michael and I had always talked about buying a small cottage on the coast of Lake Michigan, in Door County, Wisconsin. A quiet place to escape the Chicago suburbs, a place to grow old, a place to watch the seasons change over the water. After he died, the dream felt too painful to pursue alone. It was our dream and he was gone. But now it felt like a lifeline. It felt like his way of telling me it was time to take care of myself. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of secret activity. I told my staff at the bakery I was taking a few personal days to scout new suppliers. I didn't text Jessica where I was going. I just got in my car and drove north, a feeling of illicit freedom bubbling in my chest. The moment I crossed the state line into Wisconsin, I felt a weight lift. I met with real estate agents. I walked through charming little houses that smelled of salt air and old wood. And then I found it. Tucked away on a quiet wooded lane, there was a small cedar-shingled cottage overlooking the vast, ocean-like expanse of the lake. It had a wild, overgrown garden, a big stone fireplace, and a wide deck that was perfect for watching sunsets. It was perfect. It was everything the Lockwoods world was not. It was real, it was unpretentious, and it was mine for the taking. I made an offer that same day. It was accepted by evening. The $80,000 wouldn't cover the whole thing, of course, but it was the perfect, substantial down payment that made the dream a tangible reality. It was the key. I called my lawyer, Maria, a sharp woman who had helped me with my will after Michael died. I explained the situation briefly. I didn't need to give her all the drama. I just said, I've had a change of plans regarding a significant financial gift, and I'd like to redirect those funds into a real estate purchase. And I need it to happen fast. She didn't ask questions. She just said, I'm on it. She fast-tracked the paperwork. The closing date was scheduled for a Monday. The deadline for the sterling grand deposit was the Friday before that Monday. The poetic justice was not lost on me. While I was waiting for the final paperwork on my new life, Jessica's was about to unravel, and the collision course I had set was just days away from impact. The Friday morning of the deadline arrived crisp and clear. The sky over Chicago was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I woke up early, made myself a coffee, and sat in my quiet kitchen. For the first time in a long time, my stomach wasn't in knots. I felt a sense of purpose. I dressed carefully, not in a fancy silk dress, but in my favorite comfortable jeans, a nice blouse, and my good leather boots. I felt like myself. I drove downtown, not to the post office to mail a check, but to a tall glass building on Wacker Drive. My lawyer's office. As I sat in the conference room on the 34th floor, looking out over the city skyline and the sliver of blue that was Lake Michigan, I felt a strange sense of calm. My phone was in my purse, switched to silent. For the past week, Jessica had been texting with increasing frequency, her tone shifting from casual to annoyed. Hey, just checking in to make sure you sent the check, had become, the deadline is Friday, don't forget. And just that morning, Mom, Patricia will call me if she doesn't get it today. Please don't make this awkward. Each message was a little poke, a little reminder of my duty. I hadn't responded to any of them. My silence was its own kind of answer, but she was too self-absorbed to hear it. My lawyer, Maria, came in carrying a thick stack of papers. She had a warm, no-nonsense smile that I always found reassuring. She slid the stack across the polished mahogany table towards me. This is it, Brenda, she said. The final step. Ready to own a piece of paradise. I picked up the heavy, expensive-feeling pen. I thought about the bakery, the early mornings, the endless work, the flour under my fingernails. I thought about Michael, and how he would have loved that little cottage, how he would have spent his weekends fixing the deck and trying to fish. I thought about Jessica, my beautiful daughter, the little girl who used to help me frost cupcakes, and the stranger she had become. A wave of sadness washed over me. A final pang of grief for the relationship we had lost. It was a funeral of sorts right here in this cold corporate office. But underneath the sadness, there was something else. Something hard and strong and new. It was self-respect. It was the feeling of taking back control. I started signing. My signature was firm and clear on every page. Initial here. Sign here. Date here. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I was no longer a supporting character in the grand production of Jessica's wedding to the Lockwoods. I wasn't the dowdy mother-in-law or the family ATM. I was Brenda, a business owner, a widow, a mother, and now a homeowner. I was the lead in my own story again. When it was done, Maria gathered the papers, her smile widening. She shook my hand and then handed me a small, simple envelope. Inside was a set of 2 keys on a plain silver ring. They felt heavy and wonderful in my palm. They were the keys to my future. Congratulations, Brenda, she said. Enjoy your new life. I walked out of that building feeling 10 feet tall, The sun on my face felt warmer, the city air less suffocating. I had done something just for me for the first time in a very, very long time. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. As I drove out of the city, heading towards my quiet bungalow to start packing for real, the keys to my cottage rested on the passenger seat, glinting in the sun. I finally allowed myself to turn my phone back on. It exploded instantly, vibrating violently in my hand as a flood of notifications poured in. 3 missed calls from a number I recognized as the Sterling Grand's main line. 5 frantic texts from Jessica. And 1 voicemail left just minutes ago. I hit play. Jessica's voice, tight with irritation but not yet full-blown panic, filled my car. Mom, Patricia from the venue called me. She said she hasn't received the check. I told her you were probably just busy and that it's in the mail. Please just call me back and let me know you sent it. This is really stressful. I deleted the message. I knew what was coming next. I was almost home, turning onto my quiet residential street, when the phone rang again. It was Jessica. This time I let it go through. I took a deep breath, ready for the storm I had created, the storm I had earned. Hello, I said, my voice as calm and clear as the lake I could already picture in my mind. And the screaming began. Mom, what is going on? It was the shriek I described earlier. The sound of a carefully constructed fantasy world colliding with the harsh, cold reality of a bank statement. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated panic from someone who had never known a moment of true financial insecurity in her life. Patricia from the manor just called me, she yelled, her voice cracking with hysteria. She said the final deposit was never sent. She said they're going to release our date to another couple if they don't get a wire transfer for $80,000 in the next hour. An hour, Mom. Did you forget to mail the check? Is this some kind of sick joke? My wedding is in 3 months. Everything is booked. The flowers, the photographer, 200 guests have invitations. Everything depends on the venue. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement in her voice was breathtaking. There was no apology for her cruelty, no acknowledgement of the engagement party, no hint of self-awareness. There was only the panicked assumption that my life revolved around her wedding, and that any deviation from the plan must be a mistake on my part. A sick joke. No, Jessica. It's not a joke, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. I was surprised at my own composure. The old me would have been flustered, apologetic, trying to smooth things over. This new me was an anchor in her storm. And I didn't forget, I added. I simply chose not to send it. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I could hear the faint hum of the phone. I could practically picture her brain short-circuiting, trying to process a reality it was not equipped to handle. A world where my money was not unconditionally hers. A world where no was a possible answer. What? She finally whispered. It was a small broken sound, the voice of a child who has just been told Santa isn't real. What do you mean you chose not to? You can't do that. You promised. You signed a contract. We have a deal. I promised to help my daughter with her wedding, I corrected her, a hint of steel entering my tone now. And I'm sure Preston and his family, with their team of lawyers, can pool their considerable resources and sort it out. They seem very capable. We don't have $80,000 just lying around, she shrieked, the panic escalating into full-blown hysteria. Preston's money is in trusts. His inheritance is all tied up. My salary is nothing. You have the money, Mom. You're the one with the successful business. You have to pay it. You're ruining my life. You're doing this just to be spiteful. The accusation, so profoundly selfish, so utterly devoid of self-awareness, was the final confirmation that I had done the right thing. Let's be very clear about something, Jessica, I said, my voice dropping to a low, serious register that she hadn't heard since she was a teenager sneaking out of the house. This isn't about spite. This is about cause and effect. A few weeks ago, you made it very clear that your priority is his family, a family in which, and I'm quoting you directly, I wouldn't fit in. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot treat me like an outsider, and then expect me to finance the party you excluded me from. You cannot demand my money with one hand and push me away with the other. You drew the line, Jessica, not me. I am simply respecting the boundary you created. I could hear her sputtering, a torrent of accusations and desperate, tearful pleas. She called me selfish, vindictive, cruel. "After everything I've done for you," was a phrase I believe she used, which I found particularly rich. In the background I could hear another, sharper voice cutting through her sobs. "Jessica, give me the phone. Let me talk to her." It was Eleanor. Jessica must have passed the phone over, because the next voice I heard was clipped and imperious. "Brenda, this is Eleanor Lockwood. I don't know what kind of petty game you're playing, but you are contractually obligated." I cut her off. "Eleanor, I have no contract with you. My agreement was with my daughter, and it was contingent upon a level of familial respect that you and she have failed to provide. This is a family matter. I suggest you stay out of it." "This is an embarrassment," she hissed. "You are embarrassing my son and this entire family." "And you," I replied, my voice dripping with ice, "humiliated me in my own home and encouraged my daughter to treat me like an outcast. Seems we have different definitions of embarrassment. Now if you'll excuse me." I could hear Jessica crying again, yelling in the background. I heard Eleanor demand to know what was going on. It was a spectacular display of the very drama they had been so keen to avoid. "I have to go now, Jessica," I said, as my daughter apparently got the phone back. I was pulling into my driveway. "I have some packing to do." "Packing? What are you talking about? You have to fix this. Call the lawyer. Call the bank." "No," I said, and for the first time, I allowed a small note of pure, unadulterated satisfaction into my voice. "I don't. And as for the deposit money," I continued, delivering the final crushing blow, "I used it to make an investment. A down payment on a property. I'm sure his family will understand. After all, they seem to value smart financial planning." I hung up the phone. I turned it off and left it in the car. The silence in my little bungalow was sweet and profound. But I knew that on the other end of that line, a storm was just beginning. What happened next was a cascade of disasters that, I later heard, was even more spectacular than I could have imagined. I didn't hear from Jessica for 3 days. I spent the weekend in a blissful, focused state of packing and planning. I sorted through years of my life, deciding what to take with me to the cottage. My phone remained off, sitting dark and silent on the kitchen counter. The silence was a balm to my soul, a quiet space where I could finally hear my own thoughts again. On Tuesday, my sister Sharon called my landline. The number flashing on the caller ID made my stomach clench for a second, but I answered. Her voice was completely different from the last time we'd spoken. The condescension was gone, replaced by a tone of shocked, almost gleeful disbelief. "Brenda," she said, sounding breathless. "Oh my God, Bren. You actually did it. You really did it." "I did what?" I asked innocently, tucking the phone under my chin as I taped up a box labeled kitchen linens. "The wedding. It's a disaster. An absolute train wreck. Jessica called me last night, crying her eyes out for 2 hours straight. A small dark part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, but mostly I just felt a weary sense of inevitability. "So what happened?" Sharon then proceeded to tell me everything, a story she had pieced together from Jessica's frantic, tearful call and a very gossipy second cousin who had been on the receiving end of Eleanor's panicked phone calls. The dominoes had fallen hard. After I hung up on them, Jessica and Eleanor had descended into a state of pure panic. They called the Sterling Grand, begging, pleading, even threatening legal action. But the coordinator, Patricia, was unmoved. She informed them coldly that the deadline had passed, their contract was void, and they had already offered the date to a couple on their waitlist who could wire the full deposit immediately. They had lost the venue. Eleanor, for all her talk of wealth and influence, was apparently cash poor. As Jessica had shrieked, their money was all tied up in complicated trusts and long-term investments. Apparently, the Lockwood fortune was a slow-moving glacier, not a flowing river. Producing $80,000 in liquid cash on a Friday afternoon was apparently impossible for them. Or perhaps they were simply unwilling to risk their own capital for a wedding they expected someone else to pay for. Sharon's cousin speculated that Preston's father had put his foot down, refusing to liquidate assets for what he called Jessica's mother's tantrum. The next 48 hours were, according to Sharon, a frantic, humiliating series of phone calls. Jessica and Eleanor tried to move the entire event, the caterer, the florist, the band, the 200 guests, to a new location with less than 3 months' notice. They ended up at the only place available on such short notice for a Saturday in June, the ballroom of a soulless airport hotel. The one with the patterned wine-colored carpet that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and regret. The original caterer, a high-end company whose contract was with the Sterling Grand, flat out refused to work at the new venue, citing logistical issues and brand integrity. They didn't want their Michelin star food associated with an airport hotel. So they were stuck with the hotel's in-house catering. Instead of filet mignon and sea bass, the guests were served what Sharon's cousin described as the blandest, saddest chicken breast known to man, accompanied by overcooked green beans. The florist had to substitute most of the flowers, as the original order was tied to the Sterling Grand. The grand, cascading arrangements they had planned were replaced with smaller, less impressive bouquets. The band sounded tinny and loud in the low-ceilinged ballroom. Margaret was, I was told, mortified. The carefully crafted image of effortless wealth and class had been shattered. The guests were confused, whispering amongst themselves, wondering what had happened to the grand wedding they had been promised. The word divorce was apparently already being whispered before the vows were even exchanged. And Jessica? She cried through the entire makeshift ceremony, Sharon said, her voice dropping. She looked miserable, Brenda. Her makeup was running. She could barely get her vows out. Preston looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. It was really sad. I felt a pang not of guilt but of that quiet, cleansing pity. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. A wedding with the Lockwoods, a wedding that showed where her priorities lay. And it had turned into a chaotic, embarrassing farce. The perfect, curated image she had been willing to sacrifice her own mother for had dissolved into a second-rate party at an airport hotel. She tried to call you, Sharon said softly. A bunch of times. She left voicemails. I know, I said, looking at a box of Michael's old books I was packing. I needed some peace and quiet. There was a long pause. Then Sharon said, her voice small and full of shame. You know, I was wrong, Bren. I am so sorry. I shouldn't have said what I did. They treated you horribly. You deserved better. It was the validation I didn't know I needed. Thank you for saying that, Sharon, I said. And I meant it. It means a lot. A week later, I was no longer in my small bungalow surrounded by packing boxes and the ghosts of a life that was over. I was 100 miles up the coast, sitting on the wide cedar deck of my new cottage. It was early morning and I had a warm mug of coffee in my hands, the steam rising to meet the cool, misty air. I was watching the sunrise paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink over the vast, calm waters of Lake Michigan. The only sound was the rhythmic crash of the waves on the shore and the cry of a distant gull. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. My phone, now turned back on, lay on the small wooden table beside me. During the move, I had finally listened to the voicemails from Jessica. They were a journey in themselves. The first few were angry tirades, full of blame and accusations. Then they morphed into tearful, pleading messages, full of how could yous, and I don't understands. The last one, left 2 days ago, was just a quiet, broken sob and a whispered, "Mom, please call me." I hadn't responded. It wasn't about punishing her anymore. It was about protecting this newfound peace. This quiet space where I could finally hear my own thoughts, my own needs, for the first time in decades. I knew that answering that call would be to invite the storm back into my harbor. And I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. I thought of her standing in that drab hotel ballroom, surrounded by wilting flowers and whispering guests, her dream turned to ashes. And I felt that quiet pity again, deeper this time. She had traded something real, something unconditional. Our bond, my fierce, unwavering love, for something glittering and fake. And when the glitter washed away, all she was left with was the cheap plastic underneath. She had gotten her wedding free of the mother who wouldn't fit in. And in doing so, she had lost the one person in the world who would have moved heaven and earth for her, no questions asked. The price of fitting in with the Lockwoods was losing me. I hoped for her sake that one day she would realize it wasn't worth it. But that would be her journey, not mine. Mine was just beginning. I took a sip of my coffee. Tasted better here. I looked out at the horizon, where the sun was now a brilliant, hopeful orb, casting a diamond path across the water. I thought about the future. I would plant a garden full of rambling roses and fragrant herbs. I would read all the books I'd bought over the years but never had time to open. I would sit by the stone fireplace in the winter, a glass of wine in my hand. I would walk along the beach every single morning. Maybe I'd even open a tiny seasonal version of Brenda's Bites in the nearby tourist town, just for fun on my own terms. The possibilities felt as wide and open as the lake in front of me. They had uninvited me from a single day in her life. In return, I had invited myself to the rest of mine. It was the best deal I ever made. Sometimes drawing the hardest boundary, the one that feels like it might break you, is the only thing that can truly set you free. The price of your dignity is non-negotiable. You can't put a price tag on your self-worth. It is the most valuable inheritance you can give yourself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I feel like so many of us have been in situations where we've been made to feel small, invisible, or taken for granted by the very people who should have lifted us up. My question for you is this: have you ever had to make a difficult choice to reclaim your own worth and self-respect? I would be honored to read your stories in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more. Remember, you are not alone.